Hope everybody's doing well on this particular Monday afternoon. We're having some lovely weather, temperatures around the 70s, and that's right here in early November, a couple of days, or actually a day after daylight savings time, and all in that space. So we're actually enjoying this nice weather, almost spring-like weather here in November, even though they are saying it might get a little chillier later on in the week. But right now, we're enjoying the break in the temperature. As many of you know, when I'm not doing this whole podcasting journey and all along those lines or the live streaming, I'm oftentimes involved at a cultural arts center that I am very proud to be part of, that being the Hayti Heritage Center and African American Cultural Arts Center based here in Durham. So I had the pleasure of having the arts intensive going on and seeing the kids do drumming and seeing the kids do some storytelling and a number of other things that they are taught. They're even taught robotics, even though that didn't take place on this particular weekend and along those lines. So it's good seeing the kids doing some amazing things, and also the jazz band, which practices the North Carolina Jazz Ensemble, and they have a show coming up in December. They were down there practicing, so that was good to have. And of course, we had another group that has been there. Satos is their name, and many people may know them originally as a Collage, but they were doing their practice as they do on most Saturdays and all along those lines. And there was also a walking tour that my good friend Aya does, that is done by Whistle Stop Tours, that is under the direction of Aya Shabu, and also her husband Telly helps as well. And I think he's originally from Liberia, if I'm remembering correctly, and all in that space. So it's good to see those folks and to have a fairly good evening there. We did have some visitors that came in. As a matter of fact, the state secretary, or one of the deputy secretaries in the government of Brazil, was actually given a lecture on, of all things, religious repression. And that was what they were talking about. And now some of the native religions are repressed in various parts of the world by the various governments and all along those lines. So they were giving that lecture at North Carolina Central University. I think that was on this past Thursday, but they came by the Hayti Heritage Center to learn about some of our rich history, being part of the Black Wall Street and a number of other things that go on in that space. So it was a pleasure meeting Renata Sosa and her translator, Courtney, because definitely, if you know anything about that area, it is a lot of language that is spoken in the sense of Portuguese. And I, for one, have a foreign language Achilles heel. It was not my best suit when I was in college. Matter of fact, I had to go to summer school to get a course that was the passing course, because you had to have at least a few hours of foreign language in order to get your degree from Marquette University, my alma mater, and all in that space. And it was kicking my backside, both French and Spanish, in both high school and in college. But I did manage to get the requirement by coming to UNC to get that kind of course that I needed way back several decades ago, and all along those ways, since I am a 1984 graduate of that particular university. But like I said, they were speaking in Portuguese and I had no idea what they were saying, but they seemed to be really interested in the facility, some of the history, including the connection to Duke University and the connection between the elite of Duke and the founders of Black Wall Street, and a number of other things in that line. So we definitely had some great conversation. And then on Sunday, there were two churches that were meeting, because there's one that meets weekly, and they meet in one of our classrooms. As it is a small congregation, so it was good to have them up in their space. And then later, another one that meets about twice a month, unless there's a 5-week time, then it's every other week. But there's 5 Sundays, then they're only meeting 2 out of 5. But both of the churches had good services, as best as I could tell, and that was the relatively quiet Sunday, even though I did have a couple of bicyclists that came through that had recently moved into the area and all in that space. As a matter of fact, I believe the young lady said that she was out of Kenya originally and all in that space. And her friend that she was traveling with, I think he was from one of the rural towns here in North Carolina, and all in that kind of way. So it was good meeting them and to share some of that same history that I was talking to Deputy Secretary Renata about with them as well. So oftentimes people come by the building because they are quite fascinated by what goes on and all in that space. And there was a time that we even had a theater group. We've got Poetry Slam right now, but we've had theater groups in the past. Yours truly actually participated in that theater group. And I have a number of friends of mine that have graduated in from theater and have been involved in theater both on off Broadway and on the main Broadway as well. So definitely that is something that I've oftentimes been fascinated by and amazed by. I regularly go to the National Black Theater Festival and have had the pleasure of meeting Woody, the founder of the, or one of the principals over there at the Negro Ensemble there in New York, and a number of other people that were associated. As a matter of fact, I don't know if my guest ever knew Garland Thompson, but he was part of the Frank Severa Writers Workshop until he passed, and all along those lines. But he was part of the New York theater community, and it's always good to see people that have got that theater connection. And like I said, North Carolina Central University, which is an HBCU here, has a strong theater program, as does Hillside, which is one of our public school systems. And Wendell Tabb just recently retired from there, and he had run the theater department for a number of years and even took his kids to places like China, Australia, and a number of other countries around the world. And as a matter of fact, I think they're gearing up, even though he has left that directorship of the entire drama department, even though he might be helping with Black Nativities, and they're going to do that production again around the month of December, since it is about to be Christmas season and all along those lines. But like I said, I've got an amazing guest that has got some rich history in theater, and I'm interested to learn more about Jennifer Manacharian and what they've been doing in the theater lanes and all along those ways. So I'm going to bring them up and we can learn more about their work in the theater. So who knows, they might have even had the pleasure of working with somebody like Walter Matthau or some of the others that have definitely had their start in the theater and all in that space. As a matter of fact, I'm a big fan being in North Carolina of NYPD Blues, and we do know that definitely Sharon Lawrence has had some theater background. I think she had some around UNC, and of course she was one of the main principals there as well. And I've had the pleasure of interviewing somebody that has been very involved in our theater community here, that being Ira David Woods, who does a great production of Scrooge, and many people will know his daughter, Eva Rachel Woods, and all in that space. And of course, she's very much involved in Hollywood and all along those lines. So glad to have Jennifer join us.
Hi.
And so we've got some rich tradition of theater, even here in North Carolina, including some community theater, because we've got things like Burning Coal, and we have some other theater companies that have been part of our rich theater community that exists here in this area. I've even had some of those theater makers come on this show and other shows that we have done. But there is a very rich theatrical community here, and we have some schools that are doing great in terms of training our next leaders, whether they want to be theater teachers or whether they want to be actual performers, and all in that space. I mentioned some of them, but definitely North Carolina Central has a reputation. UNC has a reputation of a good theater department. Duke does as well. I want to say the one where your daughter, I mean, not your daughter, your sister is teaching at East Carolina, has some good theater background as well. But I know she said she's in Greenville, and I don't know if she's a fifth.
Well, she's not teaching theater,
Okay.
but North Carolina School of the Arts, a lot
Yes.
of shows go there, and I mean it's amazing school, and it's amazing theater department.
Yes. Yeah, no doubt about that. There's a great theater department there and all along those lines. And there's actually even what was one of our regular schools here was at one time called Durham High, but it's now Durham School of the Arts. So there's even a rich school that is here that is a art school and everything. And of course, everybody is familiar with the show that is about a performing arts school that is based in New York, that being both the play and the TV series from way back when called Fame, which talks about one of those type of schools there in New York. So I was wondering, did you attend one of those kind of performing arts schools? And when did you know that you wanted to be a theater producer and a theater writer? And if you'll share with our audience some of your background and some of the illustrious things that you have worked on and all in that space.
Well, I would be happy to do that. I did not go to theater school. Actually, when I was ready to go to college, I actually, for about 5 minutes, thought about going to the Academy of Dramatic Arts, thinking it would be fun to be an actress. where I had virtually zero background, never done anything. I'm very uncomfortable speaking in front of a group of people. So it was like one of my, one of those ideas that come and go. But but I want to come back to something you were saying in your introduction, not
Yes.
of me, but just in talking theater in general and Black theater. One of the plays I was involved with, which was an amazing experience, was an August Wilson play. I
Mhm.
mean, and it was, and Whoopi Goldberg was in it, and it was
Right.
Ma Rainey's Black Bottom,
Mhm.
and that was a play that was a wonderful experience. And oh my gosh, and the movie they made of it for television, I'm sure you've seen that.
Right.
Um, and it's an extraordinary play. I mean, he had such a rich body of work, but I didn't know some of the people that you talked about otherwise. But in terms of in terms of becoming a theater producer, it's really hard to tell you that it was like I always had this fantasy from childhood, just kind of a global fantasy that I would love to in some way be involved in. I was very starry-eyed about the entertainment business. But I married very young and I had a lot of children and I never really could figure out how I could fit it into my life. So it wasn't really something that didn't really become a reality to me until I don't know how old I was. I've had a number of careers. But at the time I made a switch into producing theater. I was at that time doing both family therapy. I was a family therapist, and I was also doing a field called divorce mediation.
Okay.
And an opportunity had come to me to get involved in co-producing a play. And it was, I mean, I just, it was like leaping off a bridge, a suicidal bridge, leaving your career behind. But I do things like 110% when I do it. And I decided, that's it. I'm going to go for broke. I'm going to walk away from something I'm enjoying and I trained to do, and I had a profession, and I'm going to do this other thing that's always been like a fantasy for me in my life.
Yeah,
And
just really quickly along those same kind of lines, I was just wondering your thoughts about this. But I have been involved for about 10 years, a little bit over 10 years, with a thing called the Road to New York, and it originally was a thing called the Road to the Apollo. But we have a working arrangement with that world famous theater, the Apollo Theater, where
oh,
we
of
bring
course.
some talent up to that area, and we actually get
Oh
to
my
jump the
God, I'm
line.
sorry.
Yeah, we
My
actually get
cat's fighting with I'm sorry, my cat is fighting with the
no
cord. I'm sorry.
problem.
Yeah, so the Road to Apollo.
Yeah, the Road to Apollo, and we actually have winners that we take up there, and we get to jump the line, and we've had a tremendous amount of success with it. My friend Captain Newborn, who ironically is not a captain himself, uses it partially as a way of advocacy and to bring attention to veterans issues and all along those lines. So that's part of the reason of him creating this. But we have had tremendous amount of success. We've even had some people that have got on TV shows, including a Tyler Perry show and including some other records that they've released and opening for major acts and a number of other things that they've had the chance to do, and including being in some movies and everything based on what we've been doing for 10 years. We started it ironically at Hey Tide, that cultural arts center that I mentioned. Then we went to the Boys and Girls Club, and lately over the last several years we've been going to different cities within North Carolina, and I think that there's an agreement to do it in other states as well, but I'd have to talk to Captain as to how that is working or if it's still working. But I want to say we've hit like a roughly 20, 25 counties here in North Carolina in different venues, everything from Henderson down to Kinston to a number of other towns. As a matter of fact, we've got one coming up in December in a city called Reedsville, and all along those lines, or a town, I should say, because it's
Well,
not a
is what you're talking about basically Black theater themed, or is it just theater period?
yeah, theater period. The contestants are all over. So we've had contestants that have been Asian, European.
Uh-huh.
One of
So it's
my
just no, it's just when you mentioned the Apollo and everything. I mean, New York's interesting because for a long time it was very hard to get an audience, that was not just all white. I
right.
mean, it was tourists, and so I mean, but it all actually some of the ways in which it began.
Mhm.
I mean, oh my God, I have to think about it. I think it was a Lorraine, or maybe a Raisin in the Sun.
Right.
P. Diddy was in it.
Mhm.
and it kind of changed the landscape. I mean, it really brought in a much more diversified audience,
Yeah.
and it's the shift that it's made during the time that I'm not that involved in the theater now. I mean, I've written a novel. That's part of why we're talking today.
Right.
But I've also been involved, in the other side of like writing for theater too.
Yeah.
But it's a huge shift over the period of time since I've been in the theater, where now there's one of the people I actually, oh my gosh, my cat has messed me up.
That's
Anyway, one of the people I worked with on a project that I had developed, it was with the choreographer, Chris Gatelli. It was a series of vignettes of different love stories, but it was all told through dance. And one of our writers was Lynn Nottage, who's an amazing person, amazing writer. I'm sure you know her work. I
yes,
mean,
I've
Lynn.
definitely heard that name and everything.
Oh
One
yeah, she's a Pulitzer Prize winner. I mean, she's done some amazing plays. I mean, she's an incredible um, theater writer.
Yeah.
So I mean, but it's a very different landscape now and a much more diversified audience, fortunately. And of course, because when Black Lives Matter became such a huge thing, many of the plays now on Broadway. I mean, it's just a completely art. In the period of time I've been in the theater, everything has shifted so much. It's really interesting.
And that's one of the things I was going to ask you, Miss Jennifer, and everything is that one of those people involved with that Road to the Apollo show and everything used to be one of the rental coordinators for one of our renovated theaters called the Carolina Theater, and all along those lines. And it's been around for a number of years, and it's right in the heart of downtown. It's one of those more like art house kind of theaters. As a matter of
Uh-huh.
fact, I'm currently serving as a judge for one of their film contests and all along those lines. And I've served as a judge for a number of their, well, at least two or three of their film contests. But what my friend Ray used to say is that everybody's a promoter until it's time to cut the check. I mean, everybody has these great ideas and all along these lines, but then it's a matter of where the rubber meets the road, if I can use that analogy and everything.
Right,
So I'm just
right.
wondering your thoughts around that, because I know that everybody, whether they're in New York or whether they're in a smaller city like in Durham, North Carolina, is thinking that, hey, anybody can do this. It seems like it's a glamorous
Yeah,
and a
lots. In other words,
wonderful things to do, but it's a lot of work detail.
lots of luck, right? It's and anything that makes its way to a production has gotten a very long road in front of it and a challenging road. And as you're saying, and raising the money, all of that, it's a very challenging business. And theater is. I mean, I know we're talking about theater now. I mean, I just made a film, and actually, it's. I hope it's going to be out for people to see in 2024. But any project, I mean, the film I did began with a book I optioned almost 10 years ago. I mean, and with theater too. I mean, it's a very long road. In fact, I just came from a meeting today. I've done written a book of a couple of musicals.
Mm-hmm.
And I work with a team with my composers. It's one is I have a lyricist, a composer, and we work with our director very closely too. So we all meet together, and we're working on a musical that I think now at this point we've decided it's going to be several episodes for streaming because it's so hard to get something mounted. But we've been working on this for years. We were working on it before COVID. Then everything kind of shut down for a while. But the landscape has really changed a lot. And anyway, and in fact another musical we wrote that we had a couple of nonprofit theater productions of. It was called Mary Harry. It is called Mary Harry.
Right.
And we decided to do a streaming version of it where people can. It's on Amazon, but it's on something called Streaming Musicals.
Right.
Mary Harry. And the thing about that is that it's a hybrid. We didn't do it like it's not like a movie. It's more like a theater piece, but we opened it up to the extent that it's also a theatrical. It gives you a life. It gives you the opportunity of you write a play, you get involved in a play, you open. If you're lucky, you stay running. If you have Hugh Jackman or Beyonce or Oprah above the title, you may have a long life, maybe. But it's such a tough business that when you're not well known, Um, the idea of having a production that's on film that can be streamed in different, from YouTube to Amazon to all different places, gives you a life,
Yeah,
a
no
longer
doubt.
life. So that's kind of where we're aiming to with this other musical we're working on, that hopefully it'll ultimately be on some streaming channel.
Yeah. What advice would you give to folks that are trying to raise money? Because I know a long time ago, probably about 10 or 15 years ago, I had a friend that had the notion of doing a film similar to House Party, but it was going to be like one of those kind of coming of age, for lack of a better term, kind of films. And I remember that he went and knocked on various doors. I think he even tried to do the whole kind of Robert Townsend or Spike Lee thing of going to your friends and family and all
Well, there
along
you
those
go.
lines.
That's a good one. That helps. That's been part of what's helped me. And you can also, there's ultimate there. I mean, for example, we were talking about that just today in terms of how we want to try to pitch what we're doing. And one of the things which we may do is to um, to kind of create a deck for it, and some kind of which will show what it's supposed to be about, kind of a synopsis and the different episodes. But we're going to film like the first episode, which isn't that long, but we'll film it in terms of showing what the concept is. It's not going to be fully realized, and it's a musical. And then take it out to anybody, anybody who may be in film business, in any business, or put together a group of friends, show them that, see if you can raise money that way. It's not easy. And then, when you're raising money for people in a business that's very risky, you also may be losing people's money. I mean, I'll never forget the first show I ever did. Somebody I knew had just gotten an inheritance from a parent, and it wasn't a lot of money,
Right.
but it was like the people needed the money, and she insisted on putting it into my show, and I kept saying, "Don't do it." It's too risky. It's just too risky. But people are grown ups; they make their own decisions.
Mhm.
But it's very. I don't have any great advice,
Yeah.
um, because it's hard. I mean, if you have any network whatsoever, you just have to be really resourceful. And you can also, you can put together. I mean, it may not be the ideal way. If you have any actor friends, you can put together a reading of it, or you can put together portions of it. But it's very hard to do a backers audition well. They're very tricky.
Yeah.
If you do just a piece of it, they don't really know what it is. I mean, it's I don't I guess the bottom line is I have no brilliant advice for you.
No, that's no problem and everything, and that's fair, and that's a fair statement and all of those lines. What I was going to say is that in that environment, I know that he approached some doctors and some lawyers and some other people that are part of the class that is supposed to have money, even though we know that sometimes they are struggling as well and everything. And I think we even got a fancy lawyer's office and all in that space and a nice caterer. And I want to say that we were up on the top floor of this particular office building in Raleigh, North Carolina, which is next to Durham, is our state capital. And I think we saw a few cars drive by that might have been coming by to take part in this pitch meeting, for lack of a better term. But I think that because they didn't see any other cars, kept on going. So I don't think that we met with anybody other
You
than
know,
those
it,
of
it
us that were there.
people who are business people are not going to be interested because the risk reward thing is crazy. It makes no sense. It's a very, very risky business. It's not really a business. So people who, generally speaking, you get investors who are people who are passionate about theater, or they want to go to opening night, or they want to rub elbows with Whoopi, or whatever it is. It's they're not going to be motivated by the idea of get rich quick. They just aren't. It's and you can have people who are very wealthy, and they may not give you 5 cents. And in fact, I once had an investor who put $5,000 into a show I did, which is not very much money. In fact, today it's crazy. Like if you have a musical, it's going to, the cost will be like $20 million, and even a straight play is like probably $7-8 million. It's really hard. And this guy, he was asking me for statements and everything more than anybody I ever knew, and he was wealthy. But I mean, it's not a business for people. It's a business for dreamers. It's for people who, well, and for people who believe in sporting the arts, because the arts are kind of the food for the soul.
Right.
You can, of course, cancer, children's diseases, all of that. They're obviously extremely important, but the arts should never be really discounted as something it's beyond being. Well, of course, it's not at the basic level of survival, but it really is an important element. I mean, all this work that's been done in showing when you introduce young children or you take kids who are from schools where they're kind of not very privileged, and they come and they see this, and it awakens something in them. It brings something it has a very positive impact on people. Well, music does too.
Yeah, no doubt
So
about that. Music
yeah,
definitely
so you just have to find people who really love the theater and go after them. You
Do you
know,
think do you think it also
give
helps
them
in
your give them your youngest child.
do you think it also helps if they are because I know some people also invest in things that they believe in and all along those lines. Like I just said, one of the things that was going on at that Cultural Arts Center is last week there's a gentleman, Kenny Dalsheimer, who is very much involved in the love of jazz and the love of a number of other things. So we had a jazz icon here in Durham, Brother Youssef, and they are actually in the process of making a film about his life and everything in that
That's
space. And
great.
part of the conversation is how much of the negative stuff will they cover as well, because we all have our demons that we fight, and he definitely had some demons that he was fighting in terms of addiction and stuff like that. So they're trying to
Well,
figure
that's
out
what
how much.
humanizes people. People want to know that. I
Yeah.
mean, it helps them realize there's another side to it.
No, I agree with you. It definitely helps humanize it and all along those lines. But I'm just thinking about those films that are out there that people, to your point, they might invest in it because it is a message behind it. I think that a film that one of our producers was investing in dealt with some of the things that teenagers go in through and all along those lines. I think it's called Ant Hero or something like that, but it's out of California. But one of the
Of
gentlemen
course.
that comes on this show is a hedge fund person, and I think that he invested in some stuff that dealt with that. But part of that was because he also has a passion and an interest in helping our youth and everything. So I just wondered, do
Well,
you think that it's easier if it is a cause-oriented film, for lack of a better word?
yes, yes. I think if you respond to the material in some positive way, absolutely. You and you believe it has a lesson to teach, and this, in theater, it doesn't have to be documentary.
Right.
It can be, a theme that. I mean, one of the shows I got involved with as a producer, and I mean, I didn't know if it would ever be commercial, but I loved this show so much that it was like beyond thinking about whether I was going to make any money or not. And that was Caroline or Change. I don't know if you ever saw that.
Don't think so.
Oh, Tony Kushner. It's an incredible play. It's all sung through, and it was just an amazing project. And so I mean, as a theater producer, obviously I care about budget. I care if it has the potential to make money, if I'm going to lose money for people, or at least, I mean, we were having dinner with some people, and it was a businessman. And I said something like, it's almost like in theater, if you break even, you're doing well. And this guy could not believe it. I mean, it's not, but if there's something you really, really respond to, it's almost, if you can afford it, it's almost beyond, what's makes sense. It's like a passion project.
Yeah, that makes
And
sense.
if you have never heard of Caroline or Change, I'm going to suggest that you find out about it. It's an extraordinary play. Tony Kushner he's a Jewish white man who grew up in the South, and he had a woman who was like his nanny housekeeper, and she was Caroline, the Caroline of the title.
Right.
And it's the story of this family. He's like the child in this film, and it's not autobiographical, but it's based on a lot of what he lived. And it's such an incredible story. It's about the time when Kennedy died, and they were just starting to, the civil rights movement was just starting to come to life, and it's a very, very powerful and amazing play. I don't know how you can see it. Actually, there's a site called Broadway HD,
Okay.
and they film a lot of musicals, a lot of plays, a lot of musicals. You can, it's a subscriber base, and you can see things that way. And it's one way for people to see shows that they might never see otherwise. But I also want to talk to you about my book.
Yeah, definitely want to get to the I definitely want to get to the book and all along those lines, and that's actually what I was going to get into, and definitely want to learn more about the book in addition to the theater stuff. But one of the things I was going to ask you both about the theater and the book, and I was just curious because you did mention earlier having been involved in family therapy and all in that space, and definitely have my brother actually works with what some people term at-risk youth, and done a lot of work to try to get them out of gangs and other negative involvements and all in that space. But I was just wondering, what are some of the lessons that you learned from either family therapy or even some of the divorce things that you were able to bring into this creative world of yours, whether it is theater production or the writing of the book or the writing of the screenplay? So, like I said, Nick
Well,
Palbeda, one of the directors here, is an attorney. So I was just wondering, what are some of the lessons you
oh,
learned from your jobs that you were able to bring into your artistic background?
well, I'm going to answer that, but I have to tell you something about your brother because I was involved in an organization. I'm no longer on the board of it, but it's called Council for Unity that you should have him look up
Okay.
.org, and they have programs for at-risk teens and people, all sorts of prisoners, whatever the population is. And it's they have a teaching model and module and everything else, so it might be of interest to him. But the short answer, and I don't mean to be glib,
Right.
but and I also have a large family. I have 5 children. I've been married like since before I was born. I have pets. I have 15 grandchildren. I mean, I have a lot of family. I mean, there's overlap in everything I've ever done in my life. It's almost like an accumulate. I probably couldn't have written a book when I was 40. Let's put it that way. Everything you learn from everything. It's really learning about people. Are there specific lessons I learned? I don't know. It's just about your understanding of human nature, because as far as I'm concerned, with books, with film, with theater, characters have to be 3-dimensional. They have to be real. I mean, so often people are just, particularly in film, you get stars to film in it, and so often the script to me is so poorly written because it's cardboard people. It's not real people. It's not real it's not. I mean, I care so much about developing character, and that's part of. And actually, I also teach a little privately for screenwriting, and I'm just so focused on knowing your characters inside out, knowing their flaws, knowing their habits, knowing, what when they go to their closet, what are they going to put on? What's in their closet?
Right.
What do they eat? What's their idea of entertainment? So everything I've ever done kind of leads itself, or kind of helps me have a sense of character that I think is a tool that I have in my toolbox.
No, that makes a
And
lot of sense. I could
yeah,
definitely see that.
and dialogue. I mean, dialogue is something I feel like I do natural dialogue because I know how people talk. I know how they interact. I don't sit around analyzing people, except my husband thinks I'm always analyzing him, which may be true. But but I just feel like in fact, a couple of reviews noted how the characters were well written. I just feel like as a therapist, you get to see people in their vulnerabilities.
Yeah.
You see the warts. If somebody comes into a therapist really fully defended and doesn't really want to be helped, you're not going to learn a lot from those people. But the people who kind of reveal themselves and allow themselves to be vulnerable, you learn about human nature, what makes people tick. And in divorce mediation, I mean, one of the things, it's interesting in our country, there's such a high divorce rate
Right.
that people almost think of it as a non-event. I mean, I don't mean to be dismissive, but then people go through divorce and they can't believe how hard hit they are. That we're not prepared for a lot of things. The reality of it, it's like even having children. I'll never forget when I was a family therapist, there was a woman who was on the faculty who was in her 40s, and most of us were women who were mothers.
Right.
And she had her first child, and she came into a faculty meeting about 6 weeks later, and she kind of said, "Why didn't anyone tell me?" She didn't know what had hit her.
Mm.
People, we're not really prepared for a lot of things in life. And I feel like with divorce and divorce mediation, you find out that no matter how much people are ready for that to kind of move on with their lives, because in mediation, you got to have a lot of, you really have to, if you have somebody who's really not ready to be fair or to negotiate or wants out of the marriage, the chances are you're going to have a really hard time and probably not succeed. But let's just assume it's two people, the couples who think that they're ready to move on. They're going to get stuck over something. They're going to fight over something. People are, it's very hard moving on from a broken relationship. There's so much heartache. There's so much grief. There's such sense of failure. I wouldn't have thought of how much people feel like they've failed because I don't think of it in that sense.
Mhm.
But most people who are going through a divorce feel like that. They went in with the best of intentions. Maybe they have children and they feel like it's just it's not easy. So
It's
I
not
guess,
easy. It's not easy at all. And along those same lines and everything, and I was just curious because you mentioned the 15 grandchildren, and you also mentioned the kids that you have of your own, and this loving husband of yours that you've been with for a number of years, and all along those lines. But that being said, I do know that one of the fears that people have, and you heard me even allude to different people in my own family on this show, and I've alluded to them in other shows as well. And sometimes people are afraid that writers, and no matter what you're writing, whether it's a radio or television, or whether it's books or uh, screenplays or a number of other things, that you might reveal too many of your family secrets. Because I can tell you that even on these shows, I've had folks that have been like, you might be wanting to chill out on telling people certain things, and all along those lines. And if they tell me that they don't want me to mention it, then I might curtail it or not mention it at all, and all in
well,
that space. But I was just wondering, how much does your family dynamics play into even your own writing, whether that's the book or
well,
the screenplays?
Well, I have to say, I've asked a number of people who've read my book if they don't mind, because we've got a social media campaign like, look who's reading the book now.
Right.
And we show pictures of people reading the book. So I asked my internist if she would send me her picture. She said she's loving the book. I said, oh, have you found your character yet? And she became very nervous. And she said, oh no. I said, I was only kidding. But honestly, people read things into it. They think people will read into it. It's not, there's nothing. Yes, I've taken things that are real. In fact, one of my kids called me up because one time my father had a terrible fall. He was old at the time. My parents lived into their 90s, and my father had fallen and he hit his head on a radiator. And it was a bad injury. And my son was living closer, so he took him to the ER, and I met them there. And oh my God, when my son had been there, they had done a code blue. My father's eyes had rolled back, and they thought he was dead. He wasn't. He had fainted because of the pain.
Okay.
And I wrote about that scene in a way about its character in this film. And my son read this chapter, and he said to me, "Thanks, Mom." I was dying to revisit that. Well, I mean, the character who it happened to wasn't my father, but you take things you write from you. I can't write from your head, right? I can only write from my experience. There's nothing that's autobiographical about this. And then I'll flip that around. Maybe everything is, because it all comes from me and what I know and how I've experienced. So it's not factually real.
Okay.
It's just whatever I understand about people, and what I may have slipped in, and what I may not feel comfortable with or feel like I know, I will research in terms of the feelings of it. And in fact, one of the big issues in writing nowadays is the issue of cultural appropriation.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
And it's nobody writes a book that's only from the point of view of themselves, of whatever their gender is, right? Like if you were to write a book, chances are you'd have a woman in it who would be, you'd have children in it. You'd have people who are not just look like and were you, right?
Right.
There's always going to be some level of appropriation, but I became very sensitive to it, and I was really worried about it. I actually had two characters that I took out of it, even though I felt that I felt like, to the extent I could write as authentically as I could in that character's head, I wasn't culturally that character. I mean, I will say more specifically, I had a character in there who was based on a housekeeper I grew up with, and she was with my family. I mean, I knew her so well. I knew her friends. I would go to church with her. I mean, I felt I just felt like I knew her, but I removed her because I felt uncomfortable, and people might feel like, how can you write about somebody who's such a different culture, who has a different skin color? I took it out. And another character I had written about who was gay, and I felt I'm not gay. I certainly have a lot of friends who are gay. I felt like I could write with genuineness about it, but I didn't. I just took it out. I mean, I'm sensitive to that. I try to make, I try to, I, anyway,
Yeah, but along those same lines, and kind of not to push back, but to give kind of a different point of view, I'm definitely straight myself as well. If we're going to use those kind of terminologies and all along those lines. But I mentioned that I have judged several film festivals, and one of the film festivals I've judged for the last, I think, 2 or 3 years is literally called Out South, and so it is a film festival about
it's
the
called what?
Out South. So it's an LGBTQIA type festival. So even though I am straight, I consider myself to be an ally. So therefore, I feel that I can judge films that are in that
Yeah,
genre,
yeah,
even though I am not part of that.
right. If you're not judgmental about it, I mean,
Right.
I passed no judgment on. I mean, I'm thankful. I mean, for whatever reason, I never grew up. I've always been, I guess, in my head, in many ways, somewhat of an outsider. Maybe most writers are, where I'm an observer.
Mhm.
And I've always liked all types of people. It's so much more interesting to me, a life with a mix of people. And I've always had friends of all mixed groups, and it just makes life more interesting.
No, no doubt about that. And like I said, if I was to write a book, and I don't know that I'll ever write a book, and they say everybody has
Oh,
a book and or a play in them, and definitely I've had some
here, I'm going to
experiences,
get you to
including
write a book. Come on,
I might have to join you on that because
I'll make
definitely
you a student.
I've had some interesting experiences. My parents decided to start a radio station when I was a teenager, or maybe even a preteen, when they actually got the idea, and that was on for about 12 years. And that's because they were frustrated that they didn't hear the minority voices being represented, but they also didn't hear certain kinds of music that they were fans of. They were fans of jazz and blues and R&B and a number of other things, and they weren't hearing enough of that in that particular part of North Carolina that we were living in, or just even in some of the city areas. So, like I said, literally with no background whatsoever. Dad was trained in the Air Force as an engineer and also in college in some disciplines like that. And I think mom was trained as a guidance counselor, but they decided to start a radio station and actually got involved in media after the radio station because of creating that radio station with no background in it whatsoever. And even if I was to
But a
write a book,
passion. But a
but
passion.
right, they had a passion. And even if I was to write a book, I would probably have a. You mentioned the Jewish character. My parents have been divorced for a number of years. So then dad's girlfriend, who he's been with even longer than he was with my mom and everything, is a Jewish American woman from New York City. And all along those lines, she was a prominent and is a prominent, well, she was a prominent dance critic, but she's very much in the education space. So I would probably have a character that might be similar to what I know of Miss Bellins and all along those lines. Like I said, I
There
think
you
she
go.
did some dance critic work up there in the New York City area, Linda Bellins, before she came down here and has been involved in dance. As a matter of fact, she's even shattering some of the stereotypes right now because she's been part of dance groups that are showing that you can be of a certain age and still involved in things like dance and all of that. So it's a group
You
of
can,
older
you,
women that perform.
you can even
And,
write a book when you get old.
yep,
You never, oh, goodbye.
yep.
Oh my God, my sweater is coated in white for my cat. Well, I have my book is written with about eight different points of view.
Mhm.
So that's when I really got into the issue of my going into the head of different people with different points of view. But the basic character, there's an old woman who's kind of the Bet of the cover, Bette, and she wakes up one morning. She's 95. Wakes up one morning and makes a decision to give a dinner party that night, and nobody knows why. They
Well,
can't figure it out for a small group of people, and so all the people she invites have their own chapters of they're all very different, and they all have their own points of view. Her daughter, her great granddaughter, housekeeper she has, an aide she has because she's in a wheelchair, a couple of neighbors. I have a very nasty neighbor who's going to be the basis of my second book because she's fun to write about. So I really had to go into the head of these people, and they're very different, and try to create different voices. It's interesting. I have an audiobook that's coming out shortly. It should have been out already, but it isn't. And I'm going to be interested sometimes when they have audiobooks where they have different characters. They have different actors doing it, but I have one actor doing all of it. So she's going to have quite a time. I've listened to some of it, but not all of it because I'm sick of my own book at this point. But how she's going to, creates the different voices for the different people and all the different scenes will be interesting to create them differently.
Did you ever think about having different voices? Because I've done a couple of Audible type books, and I was actually a part of a theater group that was an audio theater group that actually came out of Clubhouse called the Funky Eye Puppet. So I do know some folks that have done that audio kind of voices, and sometimes even playing characters that are more childlike or things along those lines.
Yeah.
But then I also have auditioned, I think Amazon, and I forgot the name of the platform, but they have a platform that you can actually create audio voices for different.
Yeah, I mean, well, you have a great speaking voice, but I don't. It'd be interesting if you were to narrate a novel about a woman.
Yeah.
But why not? I mean, I don't know if you ever heard that, and he got all sorts of awards for it. Jim Dale, who's the English actor, he did all the characters of Harry Potter. And I heard that the way he did it was that I don't know how many characters he had to create, maybe over 60.
Wow.
But he recorded each separate voice so that when he was, maybe I'm wrong, but this is what I remember. So I don't know if it's actual, but he recorded each voice. So when he was going to be reading a certain chapter, he would, kind of remind himself of the voices that he was going to be playing and how to change them. But you're talking about kind of a pro at the top of his form. Right. He did an amazing job. And it's interesting. I mean, if you sit and you read to your children or you read to your grandchildren, you don't have 5 people there reading. You're going to play all the parts. You're going to read all the parts. So there's no reason why one person can't read something and differentiate the different people in some subtle way that makes it real.
No, I know that when they sent me your PR stuff, both Greenleaf as well as podcast guests and everything, they had a statement that you had that a lot of folks will be curious as to what you meant by that, because a lot of times people think of writing, and we've been kind of alluding to it, whether it's books or whether it's film or a number of other things, as being this kind of solo activity. But one of the things that you have talked about is the notion of writing being a team sport. And I was just curious as to what exactly that means, because a lot of people, when they think of writing, they think of going off into the quiet room and writing by themselves, and then kind of just kind of the thoughts, maybe getting some muse, whatever that muse may be, to help inspire them. But they don't think of it necessarily the way that you would basketball and some of the actual team sports. So when I saw that, I said I was going to ask you about that, because I'm going, most people would not think of writing, and particularly writing fiction, as being a team sport.
It's a good question. I'm glad you asked me, because I certainly say, if I sit down and I'm reading A Farewell to Arms or, Hemingway, I'm thinking of him in his room and typing. Maybe I can only talk about writing in the 20th, in our century, right? It may have been different in the past, but even then, I'm sure he had an editor that he worked with very closely. I started writing this book. I feel comfortable writing screen, dialogue and that type of thing. That's kind of and it's a very different thing. You're creating the characters through dialogue, and you have to say, well, they entered the room and the room was a large living room and it had a white couch, whatever. It's not setting the whole scene. When you go to write a novel, it's a very different process to me. You have to be the camera. You have to take people there. I can't just have a conversation with you. It's like I was talking to Marc, and as she was talking, she picked up her drink and had a little bit while she thought about his question. And, you do a lot of filler stuff that was very hard for me to learn. And I initially, a friend of mine who's a writer was teaching a writing class at my library, and she said, "Why don't you come and just see what it's like?" And I did, and it was maybe 10 years ago. And at that time, I thought, man, I don't even know if I have a short story in me, 500 words. Well, I really liked it. I mean, and I love being part of that group, and we all give each other feedback. And I just got very used to working with other writers. And I mean, some people are if you're defensive and you can't take in feedback, and particularly if people give you the kind of feedback that is, well, if people give you the same type of notes and you're ignoring them, to me, you got to put your ego aside.
Right.
And your aim is to make your work the best you can. And so I got used to working some of my material in my book, even, some of it I would read in my group. I would read parts of it in my group and they would give me feedback. So sport isn't the right word, but maybe it's more like it takes a village. To me, if the more you want it to be, the better you want it to be, the more you hone it. I mean, obviously you can work something to death, and that's not advisable either. But if you're not open to listening to good feedback, not only I had my writing group, which didn't meet that often, and I didn't get a chance to talk about my work that often, but I am part of a writers group of people who are all published writers. And every summer we try to do like a 1 week writing retreat where we go away and we just write all day. It's wonderful. We write all day, and somebody winds up cooking. Everybody takes turns. And I'm on a podcast right now. You want to come say hello? It's my husband.
No problem.
I'm sorry. You can say hello. I'm talking to a nice gentleman, Marc Lee from Cap.
Well, Kellan, how you doing?
We're doing We're working on a podcast.
All right.
Okay.
Great. Sounds great.
All right.
No problem.
Bye-bye.
So I spent the night in New York City last night with my daughter, so I hadn't seen my husband. So we, in our writing group, and then at night we would either read works we'd done, or we'd do feedback, or if we had something we were feeling stuck about, we would talk about it to each other and everybody else in the group, and they're all published. It's not, I was like the newbie on the group. But they take feedback from each other. And what I found everybody's writing style was different. And you only take, you take what resonates with you. You say, yeah, you're absolutely, that makes sense. If it doesn't make sense, you say, oh yeah, that's interesting, and you don't do it. But the writers that I work with have very different styles, and it's like there are maybe 5 or 6 of them, and they would each give me different feedback that would help me. One person in particular really helped me to kind of draw out and help people see where they were, paint the scene, so to speak. Mm-hmm. I would have never been able. I mean, you depend on. It's not like she hasn't written it for me. She's pointing out that I'm not seeing I'm not seeing it on the page. Mm-hmm. So I go back and I work on it and say, well, is this better? I mean, I feel like you're just going to make it better by talking to other people about it. And maybe that's partly because in theater, having done musicals where you go into rehearsal and it's so collaborative. Everybody's a part of it. The costume designer may make some comment that'll make it better. Everybody's part of working together. And I love that. So I listen to them. My sisters are both really smart and great readers. I listen to their feedback. I send it out for feedback to people whose opinions I trust. Mm-hmm. And I'm very open to making changes. And and then finally, when I felt like I had gotten it as far as I could get it, and I didn't feel like I just didn't have anything fresh to add to it, I hired a developmental editor. Now, if you get an agent, they may send you to one. But I decided if I'm going to try to get an agent, I'm going to make it the best it can be before I go on that process. So I got somebody, and she initially, for a relatively small fee, she gave me an overall picture of it and said, this is what you need to do. I can help you with it for this fee, or else you're on your own and you do it. And I decided to use her all the way. And she gave me I thought I was going to faint when I got her email. It was like 2,000 notes or something. I mean, And some of it was like you've used the same word beauty in, in two different paragraphs. Some of it was very easy fixes.
Right.
And some of it was, changes. Or one of the things she had suggested to anybody who might want to read the book is there was a character, the woman who died, her husband, George, he's kind of there in kind of the ether in this book. And she suggested that I make him more real by having all the different characters have had something about him that they remember, or something that was part of their lives, as kind of a glue that puts it all together. And it made so much sense to me. I thought, wow, why didn't I think of that? So when I first saw it, it took me a little while, to have the courage to go back and do all that work. But I did. I mean, I took almost every note that she gave me, except for the final note, which I didn't agree with, and I didn't do. And I'm not sorry, but it was just, I clicked. I mean, I really got it.
Yeah,
But
sounds
no
like
matter, and then I had to make the decision as to how I want to try to get this book out into the world, because I felt it was in good shape. But the process I did was the hybrid process, where I went to a type of a publisher. They're called hybrid publishers. They're very selective. They don't take everybody. It's not like the Amazon thing where you can just give them your stuff. I forget what that program's called. Most of the books on Amazon are not given to them that way.
Right.
It's a Kindle thing, I think. But they only, the publishers that I went to, they take a very small percent. Greenleaf took like 15% of the submissions. And there was another place that was a very good publisher. I heard from Greenleaf first, and they wanted to do it, and they didn't want any changes. So, I had really done my work before I brought it to them. But often if you go and you get an agent, I chose not to do that, because working with other writers, one of my writer friends, from the time they accepted her book to the time it was published was 3 years. And
Right.
I'm not I don't have that much sand in the upper half of the hourglass. I'm not young. And I didn't want to wait a long time to find out, first, can I find an agent? Second of all, is the agent going to find a publisher? I also had more control. I had control over the cover and control over the title. And I feel like they're both really good. I worked hard on them both, and I didn't design the cover, but I worked very carefully with the designer, because I felt like nobody's ever heard of me.
Right.
And I need a cover that's really gonna pop and draw attention. So I had control, and I also, from the time I accepted to work with them to the time it was at Amazon, was less than 6 months. So, it's there's pros and cons. I have to do, a lot of my own work. But let's just say hypothetically, I had gone and gotten an agent's going to take your work, going to send it to an editor who's going to do a lot of work, make changes you have to do. You go back, you make the changes, then they get a publisher. The publishers may say, no, wait a minute. I think this should be happening sometime. So it's not just a person sitting and, working on their keyboard, writing a book.
Everything. Just along those, yes, it definitely sounds like it's a lot
I'm
of work.
sorry, that's a very long-winded answer, but it's just not one person creating of something, and then the way it's created, it's what you're going to see on the page. It requires a lot more than that.
No, I hear what you're saying. Actually, a good friend of mine, we actually worked together at a scoring company called Measurement Incorporated, but Elizabeth Hine wrote a book that has the Eiffel Tower in the story, and it's about a kind of a woman going through her medical journeys and all along those lines. And she's written a number of other books, but she's also been an editor and also a writing coach and a number of other things. So she's definitely done the work into this kind of field. And yeah, you're right. It is oftentimes a lot of involvement of different types of people, and not just the person that got the book in their head or whatever. So you're absolutely right along those lines. One of the things I was curious about is, even with the work-life balance and all along those lines, and I'm definitely curious to see, because that's something we talk about on a lot of our shows here on the network about. But when I was doing research on you, I saw that way back in the late 90s, it might have been the first time that you got involved in terms of the film work that you did. You actually did a film with your son. And I don't know how old the son was at the time. I was thinking maybe they were in their 30s or maybe even in their 20s. But what was it like working on a film with your son? And did he actually listen to his mom, or did y'all go clash heads when y'all worked on this film together back in 1996? And I don't know the title of the film, but I'd love to hear a little
Well,
around that
listen,
story as well.
it's hard to collaborate, but I want to just say one more thing about the writing as a team sport or a village or whatever. This started during the pandemic, and probably wouldn't have happened otherwise. But even though a bunch of us as writers used to go on Zoom all day sometimes, we didn't necessarily even talk to each other. But it was like a support group. We were so isolated, so we would see each other on Zoom, and like if somebody we would be on mute. If somebody had a question about where they're writing, or what's the right word I want for this, or whatever it was, or can I read you this and see what you think. So that was another way we worked together, because I'm a social person. I like doing, and I like collaborating. I love working with other people. It doesn't diminish you. To me, it makes your work even better.
No,
But
because
going back to
go get into collaboration, but I've seen some of those rooms that you're talking about in terms of writers supporting each other, even in
It's
Clubhouse and
great.
in some of the other social media lanes. So I've definitely seen
Yeah,
some of those
you can
rooms where
do
they even like write in silence. I think one of the rooms they write in silence for 15 minutes, and then they might ask questions of each other after
Yeah,
that.
there's a whole format for a lot of different things like that. Or you give them prompts. I mean, writing prompts to me, writing a lot of what I come up with come from a writing prompt. I don't know if you have, somebody gives you a prompt, like the man was walking down the road and he saw and it stops there. And then
Right.
you have 10 minutes and you're off and running. And once you start, you got to stick with it. And you never, honestly, it's weird. You don't
Right.
ever know where you're going to go with it.
Yeah.
And in fact, my character in my book, Bet, was kind of started with a prompt that it was really about my mother, but it changed. I mean, it morphed a million times, but in terms of my son, I have to think about how old he was. He was in his 30s. He was in his 30s at the time, and we have that in common, where we love to talk about movies and stuff. And I have to say, I hope my other kids aren't listening, because they may not like this, but I feel like he was the only one of my children I could have done something like that with.
Mhm.
He's just very non-competitive. We always just wanted it to be the best. It wasn't a matter who was right. But what we discovered, we would talk a lot about what to do, but his attention span, I mean, I'm a drone. I can work for 12 hours at a time, and somebody has to remind me that I have to eat. My bladder may remind me I have something I have to do. But I honestly, I'm very focused. I don't need to be motivated. I mean, I am motivated. And he's very different. I mean, so it finally evolved into, we would talk about things and then I would write them. And then he would give me his impressions about it. So, I mean, how you work together is a process, learning how to work together and how to do things. And I mean, listen, I just made a film, and the writer of the book that it was based on, she's a Scottish writer, and she wrote a lovely book called Closed Doors.
Right.
Well, lovely. It's really about the effect of a traumatic event on a family, because trauma doesn't affect only the individual that happens to it. It's a social event. It affects everybody. But it's about boyhood too, and growing up. And the kid in the book was like about 12, and that's the kid in our film. Is an extraordinary young actor. You'll be hearing about him. And he's 12, and he's an only child, and he's growing up. And the playwright, she's Scottish. The writer is Scottish, and so she began. She wrote a couple of versions of the screenplay, and they were very good, and it was placed in Scotland. But I had been advised it's much harder commercially to get a movie done when it's not. I mean, an American film would be much easier for me to do, and I felt like her whole vernacular, her point of view, her vocabulary, all of it is so infused with who she is and her culture, that I took over the writing of it, and I wrote many versions of it, and probably 10 million drafts. And with that, I wound up with somebody who was a producer, who was also giving me notes. I also did one of the things I did when you was I would have table readings when I would bring in a bunch of actors and I would have them read it. And when you get actors who are smart, they also, after they do it, they'll talk to you about it. I mean, we had the feedback was amazing, and it just helps you well. I guess you're hearing that I gain a lot by talking to people about what I'm doing. But when finally we got into a shape to get a director, and when I say we, it's like the producer and I that we're working together to find a director. And we just have an amazing director. And then she does her own pass of it. So she's a co-writer of it.
Mm-hmm.
And the way she worked with me was, we talked about the things she wanted to do. I mean, I think every person who works with another person has to do it differently. You learn a lot. I write with the team I work with for musicals. I mean, the way in which we've learned to work together has evolved over time. But you can only write with somebody else if you are willing to always to put your ego aside. I don't know how else to put it. It doesn't mean you'll always agree, but if it can become very contentious with people. I haven't had that experience because I always felt like if somebody really feels that strongly about it. I mean, the team I'm working with, they're married, husband couple. They live together. They think a lot alike. So it's like 2 against 1. Okay. But if they feel strongly about something, we just work so well together and we're such friends that it's if they really care that much, I mean, they don't always see things the same way, but if somebody's that invested, we'll try that. I mean, I will give that up, and they do the same for me. So it's just not everybody can collaborate. I mean, I don't know how else to put
Not
it.
everybody can collaborate and everything. One of the other things that I know both authors and filmmakers and even definitely theater producers are having this running dialogue about it. And I'd love to hear your thoughts because you've had the experience of dealing with it on both sides of the ledger and everything. But I know one of the things that people oftentimes are wondering and are trying to figure out what is the best way to go is whether they should go the route of, say, the independent publisher or the more mainstream publisher. And if I can use the Broadway analogy, whether they should go into on Broadway, and I know they're going to be very difficult to get something on Broadway because that's very expensive, or whether they should go off Broadway or even off Broadway. So I'm just wondering, what is your thoughts around that, and do you think it is easier to do it independently, whether that is through an independent book publisher or through off Broadway if we're talking theater?
Well, the analogy in a way doesn't really hold because it's two different things. I'll just try to be quick. I know I get long-winded, so just raise your hand and tell me to shut up or something. But with theater, there are pieces that are there's you get, when you're in the business for a while, you get to understand what the kind of the demographic for the different off Broadway and Broadway. It's a different thing. I mean, the scale is different. If you had a play with 24 characters, you're not going off Broadway. I mean, you can't afford to. I mean, there's and plus which off Broadway is a really tough model. It's very hard to succeed. I mean, Broadway is obviously hard to succeed, but let's just say you have a really good piece. But off Broadway, they found, and I mean, one of the shows I've been involved with, and in fact I still get checks, is Stomp. Mm-hmm. It was a complete aberration. Oh my God, that show's been very, very successful. But most of the shows that are playing these days off Broadway that are successful, meaning that they are making more money than they're costing every week, are shows that have been branded elsewhere, like Avenue Q was playing, things that have had already been kind of developed somewhere else and have already got the brand, because to create that brand off Broadway is very expensive to do, and it's very hard to do. But in terms of book writing, hybrid versus, it's not, a lot of it's not your choice. Yeah. In other words, you may write a novel that you really believe in, but you may not get an agent. Getting an agent is really tough. A lot of people, they don't want cold submissions. If you have no track record, I'm sorry. I got over COVID about a week ago, but I'm still coughing.
Well,
But it's to me hybrid. I felt. I'm sorry. I got to take a little water
yeah,
because I get the
got some
coughing.
water for sure. Got some water.
It's my for hybrid for COVID, but what I gained is 6 months immune free. So I'm willing to cough once in a while.
No, I definitely was hearing what you were saying about the difference between living. One of the things that I found fascinating is even here in another venue here in Durham, we have DPAC, which is the Durham Performing Arts Center, and a number of their shows are the Broadway traveling shows. And a lot of times people are wanting to see a Broadway production, but they don't necessarily want to travel to New York to see it and everything. So I think that there was a traveling
there's
version of
tours.
Wiz that just came here and did very well. I know several years back I saw Newsies and a number of others that have come down here. So it
By
has
the
got
way,
a reputation as being a stop for the Broadway traveling shows.
when you start, it every once in a while it can be a tour on the way to Broadway. More often, if you have you don't even have to have a successful Broadway show, but if you have a brand name, like the name of a movie that's already been established, but you don't do well on Broadway, you can possibly create a tour. And a tour it's like a less expensive, but good caliber production. When you're talking about Newsies, by the way, I don't know if you noticed the choreography in that, but that was the choreographer I worked with on developing this musical that we did, that we had an out of town production for in La Jolla, in San Diego. But to get back to your question of the hybrid versus I mean, if you are, Ann Patchett or something, you don't have to think about hybrid or the other. You have publishers waiting to publish you. Right. If you're somebody who's never been published, getting an agent is really challenging. It's very hard, very time consuming. You may or may not get one. It's not that much now, and you can then self-publish and I can't talk about it knowledgeably, but I know you can, for like $2,000 or $3,000, there's a way you can get your book up on Amazon. And I haven't done it. I don't know how to do it, but that's where you have nothing in back of you. It's like you're on your own, I think. Yeah. Whereas the hybrid publisher offers you just about everything. I mean, first of all, if they're selective, which is what mine were, it means, and they also, they have a take of the gross. So they have a vested interest in your success. So that's why they want to be careful who they decide to publish. But they offer you everything. I mean, they offer design services, marketing services, all of it for a fee. But you have an enormous amount of resources at your disposal. So you're not on your own with that.
Just really quickly, what do you say to those people that are now very excited about social media? Because I do know that a lot of our young people are thinking that I don't need to necessarily do something on Broadway or even off Broadway. I can do it in my own home and then distribute it on the YouTube or Facebook or however else they want to distribute it. And I imagine there's a number of people that are also thinking that way about the book publishing, because they can publish it themselves using these various platforms. I don't know that they're going to have the marketing support that I think that these bigger companies give them. Little
did I know when I did this book that I was going to wind up also figuring out how to market my book. I mean, I'm like, oh my God, it's something. In fact, my writer friends kept saying, well, you have to do this. I said, don't talk to me about it. I don't want to know about it. I don't want to hear about it. I mean, they would have all these blogs, and like a year ahead of time, they would be starting to do all this social media. Well, in the meantime, I've had to learn a lot about it to become a marketer. I've created a whole campaign. I've hired somebody to help me with it. You're doing my podcast now. Why am I'm also trying to find, my own way to do these things. But once you write a book, you don't just write a book anymore. Yeah. The publishing, I never, I didn't publish 30 years ago. I don't know how it was different. My mother actually wrote a bunch of cookbooks, but this was a long time ago. She wrote like cookbooks and garden books. And I think her publisher, she didn't have to go out and go to some bookstore and, sign books and stuff. I mean, it's taken over my life.
Yeah.
And it really wasn't, I want to be writing. This was not what I had anticipated, but it's how, if you want your book to have any sales, it's how you have to do it. Although I love, it's lovely to talk to charming people like you and to talk about it. And this, I mean, podcasts is very different from a lot of the other stuff I have to do is, coming up, I don't know, just having to go onto all these. I just got some message saying I had so many people had commented on something in LinkedIn. So now I have to go to LinkedIn and I have to look all that stuff up. I mean, it just isn't how I wanted to be using my time. But if you're going to write a book in this particular moment in history, unless you're a major writer where your publisher is going to, set this all up for you and you're going to be on the Today Show and the this and the that, you got to go out and learn how to market your book.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Speaking of learning how to market your book and everything, we still got a few more minutes to go in all along those lines. How hard was it coming back to the theater world for you? Because we live in a global community. Definitely Pod TV is global and everything. And I did see that one of your productions, I'm not sure which one, was actually done in London. So you've done a number of things that were mostly here in the United States, but you had the pleasure of doing something in London. I don't know whether you tried any of the Asian or African markets as well, but how hard is it to take something, whether it is theater or even any other kind of production, and bring it to the rest of the global community in your mind? How hard was it to get to get to London?
Well, I like a lot of things I do, it may not be the process you would have thought of. This was a show that there was a film called The Umbrellas of Cherbourg, and it was a musical. It was all music, and it was kind of a very fanciful story. And they created it was being developed in London, and they needed additional money and they needed more producers. And so I haven't been doing this lately, but a friend of mine and we partner sometimes on doing things. And she told me about it. She brought it to me and she said, they need this money. It's not that much money. If we get involved, we will have the first right to bring it to New York if it's successful. No, I mean, for the amount of money that was involved, that was a pretty darn good motivation to want to be involved, because if it had been successful, we would have had the right to bring it to Broadway. And it would, when things come from London and they've been successful in London, it's enormous help in terms of getting your show, seen. So actually, I wasn't very involved in the development or anything else. But if you're curious, I don't know how much you want to hear about it, but it was a tough experience. It turned out to be tough. There were 3 or 4 of us who were going to go in together to raise the money. And I went over to London and I actually saw the last rehearsal they did of the show. And it was supposed to then go into a regional theater in England, the UK, and then come back to the West End. That was the route it was going. So I'm sitting there and there weren't very many people. There was a small audience of people watching the last rehearsal. And what they had done is they had taken this movie and they had created a character. There's a woman, a cabaret singer. Her name is Meow Meow. And she's quite well known, but the fact that I didn't know her, it doesn't mean anything, but she was well known. And she was really, very captivating performer. And her role, they found a way of kind of weaving her in and out of the story in a way that really pulled all the elements together. And so I watched this rehearsal and I'm sitting, the composer, part of the composer, I think it was the book writer, was dead. So it was his estate. The people, I'm sitting next to the people who are the estate of this writer. And it was charming. And I thought, okay, we're in. Okay. So for my whole group, I said, okay, we're in. The next thing I found out when it moved to then the regional theater in the England, that the estate made a decision that they didn't like the use of this character, Meow Meow, and they withdrew their permission for what had been done, and the character they had created. They did not like that character, and they withdrew the permission to use that character. I mean, it just totally, so they had to completely reconceive how she would be used.
Wow.
So I was kind of alarmed, and particularly since I involved several other people and there were, money involved. And I said they'd all agreed to do it based on my having said it was, I thought it was charming. So I come back home, and then a few weeks later, when it was coming back from the regional back to London, I went back to London with the others for the opening of it. And when I got to London, I went to a preview, and I'm sitting in that preview, and my heart is sinking, because the way in which they have recreated this character was just it. I just thought it was awful, and it completely changed everything. Anyway, it's a long story short. Yeah,
No, that definitely, I appreciate that. One of the things that we did earlier on today in our news show, because we also do a news show, is we had Sarah Ting on, and she is got an organization called World Unity Incorporated, I think it is, but it's about trying to make sure that we have a more peaceful world. I think she's got a thing called the Sun Point, which basically talks about how the sun shines on everybody, no matter what our differences may be. And I saw a similar kind of message to you, an organization that you were part of called the Peace Studio. So I was just wondering your thoughts around the use of the arts to create a more empathetic and even a less divided world, because I did see that you are involved with the Peace Studio as well. So I'd love to hear more about this.
All right. Well, I'm glad you asked, because we don't live in a peaceful world anymore. We live in a world. I mean, it's threatened on so many levels. Anyway, don't get me started there. But the Peace Studio is an organization. It was formed a little bit before the start of COVID, and it was formed by one of the founders, was Maya Sotero, who is the half sister of Obama, who I happen to have known. And so Maya was the one who kind of brought me into it. And then the other people who were founding it were a couple of people who are the head of an agency that represents artists. And the mission, and then it went right into COVID, so it was very challenging. But the mission has taken time to kind of really kind of solidify the path we want to go on. And it has an amazing board. I mean, it's just people who are all very, I keep saying, how on earth did I get into this board? It was only through my friendship. I mean, I am the least accomplished person on this board, and they're amazing. But the whole goal of it, and it's really been hopefully it'll be even more and more successful. But the goal of it is to fund artists who spread messages of peace in the broadest sense of the world, not bullying. It's not like war and peace. It's like, inclusiveness. It's like in the best sense of the word for peace. And they take it back into their communities, because I think one of the lessons that I've learned, and I'm involved in another board, which is involved with, it's called 18 by vote.org, and the goal of that organization is to get people to register to vote. We need people to care about our democracy. We need people to get engaged as citizens in this country. And the old what I've learned in both of these organizations, which was a little different from what I thought going in, because there's, with TikTok and Twitter and everything else, so many ways of spreading messages wide. It's very grassroots. The way you change people's hearts and minds is a lot of it's one-on-one. If you take, for the voting, for example, if you go you take people who know a community and go into the community and talk to people, and you say, look, in your community, you got rust in your water, you got to care about these things. And the only way you can do anything is by voting. It becomes one-on-one rather than Taylor Swift singing a song about you should register to vote. And the same with the Peace Studio. You want to make a difference, you go into communities, and you're doing that in the kind of work that you do in North Carolina.
Definitely I do that, whether it's the Hayti Center, or I've been involved in some activism organizations as well, including some political ones in the past as well. But one of the things I was curious about, because one of the other boards you serve on, and I'm a big advocate of board involvement. I served on the board and just came down about a year ago in the Carolina Theater that I mentioned and everything, and I've served on boards of like Mallarmé, which is a chamber orchestra, and the Durham Symphony, and some other artistic groups. But I did see that you were on the board of New York Stage and Film, which is a nonprofit devoted to developing new works.
They develop theater. Yeah, theater does change. I mean, it totally changes how people. I mean, and I'm gonna go back to the Peace Studio because this isn't something. It was something somebody had said, and it was so amazing. It's about maybe I'm not going to give you the specifics right because I just don't remember the details. But it was like there's a violinist maybe with the San Francisco on whatever their orchestra is there, and this man volunteers his time to go to homeless shelters and to play beautiful music. And it's not just that the music speaks to the spirit of people, but it tells them they're worthy. That this person who's an accomplished musician wants to play for them, that they're worthy of hearing this, and you don't just have to put on a suit and go to the chamber, the music society. There's so many ways in which the arts elevate people. They speak to people. Right now in my life, particularly with all my grandchildren, I'm so concerned about the state of the world. I didn't want to get on a soapbox. I'm not gonna get on it. Don't get scared. But
it's perfectly all right to get on the soapbox
about
because I hear your concerns. It's one that I have. I don't have. I think I alluded to this earlier. I don't have any kids of my own, but I do have two nephews that are 14 and 15 respectively. They just turned that year on August, so not that long ago, and everything. And yes, I am very concerned for the world that they are about to go into as adults, and should they be fortunate enough to find their other half and get married and have kids of their own, I'm definitely concerned for that year as well.
A world where they can breathe the air. I mean, the effort that I'm doing, 18byvote.org is nonpartisan.
Mm-hmm.
But you need people who care. Well, there's the whole women's rights issue. Okay, we won't start that. That's political. But, the environment, the gun violence. I mean, there's so many ways that young people are the ones who are really affected. They're in the front lines for a lot of these shootings and everything else. Mm-hmm. And the women's issues is, the abortion thing, the climate. I mean, they're the ones who are going to be living in this climate, which is more and more, out of control. You got to get them engaged and caring. And so they're both of these two things that I'm involved with. Well, New York Stage and Film's another one. In fact, we had our gala last night. That was why I was in New York. And one of the people who was there were two people honored. It was an amazing night. I'm still kind of glowing from it. But one of the people honored was Billy Porter, and he was wonderful. I mean, it was so lovely. And one of the things they talked about, and Lilias White, who's an incredible Broadway singer. I mean, wow, does she have a voice? And Billy, he was talking about how when he was a child, and he was, this young kid, and he knew he was gay early on, and which made him feel different. And he had seen a version of The Wiz with this same Lilias White, who sang the song that he wrote last night and it changed his life. It gave him something, this is a direct way in which the arts can help people and that's like Peace Studio message. And another person who was honored was the woman, Sarah Kate Ellis. I'm bad at remembering names, and she's the head of GLAAD. And she gave her speech was unbelievable. It was like the playbook for the Peace Studio, what she said about what their aims are and how you need to reach out and help people and elevate people. And it was extraordinary. And I don't know how this all began, this conversation, but I feel
what happens on these shows is I have very free-flowing conversations is what I enjoy. And like I said, we'll get ready to end shortly, but that's what I enjoy about these. But I was actually just thinking about a gala that I went to several years back, actually at American Tobacco, and actually featured somebody from the fashion world that we lost not that long ago. And sometimes he could have a little bit of an ego, but I mean, sometimes people have ego.
Oh, you're talking about what's his name?
Andre Leon Talley, yes, because he's
originally
from Durham, North Carolina.
No, he had a huge ego, but he was so interesting. But I care a lot about the world right now. I really do. It's and everybody that I know and I speak to, they all share my concerns. But
How do you
we
manage this really quickly? That's where I was going to go when even mentioning Andre Leontali, because they're two quick questions, actually three, because it's one that I ask all my guests and everything. But how, whether you're writing the book and having that village working on the book, or whether you're working on a play, or whether you're working on a number of other things, even your family life, how do you manage the various personalities that are there? Because that's one of the things that I think you have to do as a producer of anything, is manage the different personalities, and all along those lines, it seems to be a great exercise in both conflict resolution, which part of what my brother's field of study
well,
is,
that's
and
what I
everything,
did.
but also the
Mediation.
notion of trying to balance the different kinds of personalities, because you might have the mousy type versus the very boisterous type, and all along those lines. So how were you able, as a theater producer and film producer, to balance these different types of personalities?
Well, let me say this: as a theater producer, I was very rarely the lead producer, but
Okay.
a lot of everything in life has to do with who the people are you choose to work with.
Right.
There was one project that I was involved with that I'm not going to name, where it was very contentious with the people. I am a Libra. I believe, as a mediator, I believe that a good agreement is one where everybody has to give a little, but feels good about it at the end. I don't. I really prefer never to have it come down to a vote where somebody feels it's kind of put out. I'd rather try to avoid that and get to that point. So it's something that I just feel like, well, maybe it's because I'm older and I'm not hungry, and to me it's about choosing the people you work with, and choosing to work with people who are collaborators. If you get involved with people who are not, or who are difficult, it's I try to avoid that, because it's corrosive.
Mhm.
It comes from the top down. Like, for example, I'm going to talk about the director I'm working with on the film, Tessa Blake. Tessa is just a lovely human being to everybody on the set. If they have something they want to say, or something she'll hear it. She's a collaborator in the greatest sense of the word. I mean, we just I maybe we got lucky, that's all. But I just, and we don't always agree.
Okay.
It isn't, you don't always have to agree. But if you have somebody who's if you have somebody who's a bulldozer, and I've been in experiences like that, it's not worth it to me anymore. I would rather not work on something if it means working with somebody who can't work collaboratively with everybody. So I don't have any.
That's great advice, and I love that advice and everything. And speaking of collaborative and all along those lines, we're definitely in the middle of a writer's strike that's going on there in Hollywood and everything. And I
No,
know part of
excuse me,
their concerns is the
but
way
Mark,
that technology is taking over and everything. But I'd love
well,
to hear
the
your
writer's
thoughts.
strike was settled.
Okay,
It's the Screen Actors
Screen
Guild
actors, you
strike
are
that's
correct.
still on, because the writer's strike actually began. We submitted our final script virtually midnight before the Writers Guild strike started, because our director is also a Writers Guild member. So we couldn't. Usually, when you're filming something, you give people changes during the show. You give them different pages, and you can make changes. We couldn't make any changes. It was great because we were so prepared. But that was one thing. But the Screen Actors Guild strike is still in existence, and it's affected us in a few ways. Well, I mean, one of the ways in which it affected us is that our final film there's going to have to be some scenes that are dubbed. They call it ADR,
Right.
and we finally got a waiver to do it, but it took a long, long time to get that. So if you can't do that, if you've got dialogue that you can't hear, or it's all messed up or whatever, you go back and re-record it.
Mm.
And if you don't get permission to do it, you can't do it.
Yeah. Are you at all concerned, as a writer both of books and of film, about the notion of AI and some of the technology, and whether it might make writers less needed? I know a lot of people are excited about Chat GPT and other forms of these tools, because I've heard of even some people that are literally writing their entire scripts off of these tools and everything. But I was just wondering, because I really, what you talked about was the nuances of character. And I personally do not know that AI is going to get those nuances as of yet, even though I have some friends in that lane that tell me that it is on the way that it can get the nuances. But
Well,
I
I
am not
believe, well,
100%
it probably is. It probably is because it'll get there. You know, of am I concerned? Of course. I mean, the whole world. I mean, it's like the technology and stuff that's going on. I mean, God knows what this world's going to be like in 20 years. But I do have to say, you know, I'm not a teacher who has to worry about kids submitting things that may have been done by AI. I
Hmm.
think there's ways you can find out though. I mean, for example, I was at a wedding recently and somebody had given a speech, and in my head I'm listening and I'm thinking, boy, this was written by AI. And I happened to find out I was right afterwards because I knew the person who was giving it, and it just wasn't that person. You know, so I mean, I think at this point there maybe actually I have to tell you, I used a little AI. I didn't, not to design the book cover, but when I was giving ideas to the designer in terms of what I'm looking for, I put different words into one of these chat things, and then I put the name of a couple of different famous um, artists whose work I kind of liked and felt like it would be the type of image I want. One of them was Hockney, and part of my book cover, which has got a wonderful blue in it, which is kind of the blue of Hockney's pools and stuff, was kind of directly. I sent all those images to the book people, the design people, to tell them what I want. I mean, AI. Yes, it's very threatening. Everything is new. Listen, we're in a brand new. This electronic age is new
Yeah, it's
on so
definitely.
many levels. I mean, there's medical level. There's a ton of ways in which it's new, and it's, you know, it's a little scary. And when you get older, it's like you're thinking, oh my God, maybe it's time for me to leave the party.
I
I
don't
mean,
need to leave the party. You're still doing amazing things and all along those lines. But that being said, one of the other things I was curious about is you mentioned it earlier in some of your bios and other stuff, but being part of the like the earlier stages, and I know that it went way back even to the early 19th century and everything. But what is your thoughts as to how women in general are being treated? You kind of alluded to it earlier with Roe and everything, but I'd love to hear your thoughts about where we are in terms of the women's movement and all along those lines, because it does sound like you were definitely doing a lot of your work in the earlier days when it was very much prominent and all along those lines. And I don't know that it is as prominent, even though I
well,
understand a lot of young
well,
people
Roe
are
v.
concerned.
Wade is a whole other issue, and that's a whole political issue. But in terms of a woman, well, I have to tell you, I was a young mother with 4 children at that time when the women's movement kind of broke out.
Right.
And my mother was she had an extraordinary job before she got married. And she thought she should be married. She was like 25. She was worried that she was like, you know, you're supposed to be married at this. Anyway, she met my father. Believe it or not, my parents, I think they got engaged on their first or second date and married 2 months later. And they were both successful and attractive. And my mother, when she had her first child, she felt like she couldn't have that career. So she channeled a lot of that energy and need for a career into things that she did at home. And she wrote cookbooks and garden books. And but I feel like that kind of, I always, and I'm one of 3 sisters. There was never a boy in our family. So I feel like from in different ways from both my parents, there was always kind of an expectation of, not necessarily an expectation of being a working mother, but there was that kind of that ambition. There was something channeling underneath it. And when the women's movement, I was very young. I was still in my 20s. I had all these kids. My husband's Iranian, so he came from such a different culture, you know, it and all of a sudden, you know, I wanted like to be out in the world as well. And it was a very, very tumultuous time in my life. It was not an easy transition for my husband or for myself. But by the time I had my youngest child, when I was in my early 30s, I was starting to work part-time. And my feeling about the women's movement is, you know, I mean, I don't like to even think of it as a women. where a lot of even to today's couples, and this is so many years later than when I was young, but the role responsibility is very rarely equal. It's usually imbalanced. And people who have gotten used to a two-income family, and the and the we're people who I'm kind of talking about people who work by choice rather than just
Right.
people who have to work. That was a whole other issue. It's not as women's movement as much as the pocketbook, but for women who had a choice, it was very often if they wanted to do it, they also had the total responsibility in many ways of figuring out the lives of the children. I mean, it's a very it's it's not easy. It's to be a working mother,
Yes, definitely not
unless
easy. You know, my mom was a working mother and all along those lines. What has it been like working or living in a cross-cultural society? I know that there was a very popular film about a black-white relationship called Loving, and many people will be aware of that particular movie
that's on it.
and all
Right.
along those lines and everything. But what was it like then? And do you feel that some of those same issues arise now? I have a dear friend of mine that is actually Christian and married to a American Muslim, and they've been married now, I think, for a years and all along those lines. But I'm just wondering, was it like, and did you get any pushback being raised in a cross cultural community with your husband being Iranian and you being your ancestry?
Well, I mean, religion was never an issue because neither one of us is religious. Um, but of course, there's cultural differences. There's cultural norms, the expectations of women. I mean, and my husband and I are personal. I mean, we've had plenty of challenges, but we've made it through we've been married a very long time. Um, so I don't want to generalize too much, but I think that, I mean, I guess in many ways I've been a trailblazer
Mhm.
in my family, although there's other women who work in our family. But my husband, I think that he struggled a lot, just on a personal level, with my needing something more. Like it wasn't enough just to be a wife. It's almost like, I guess for him it was like an ego thing as to why isn't that enough or something. And I had a point of no return. I mean, I really, but I have to say, in a more, I'm kind of all over the place now. But my mother, I feel like my mother worked from home, but she was kind of emotionally absent. But I kind of equated that with, um, I felt like I had to be there for my children in
Right.
a way that, I didn't feel my mother was as engaged in her life. So when I had children, I mean, I still feel that way. I mean, I'm fiercely involved with my children,
Mm.
and my grandchildren. They are really a huge part of my life, and I wanted it all. I wanted to be really hands on, and yet I wanted to go out. So it was, but I was fortunate in that as my kids were growing, I was able to work part time, and it kind of transitioned by the point I was able to be free enough to work full time. I did, but it was like by then I was pretty much, well, my youngest. I have a 14-year age gap between my oldest and youngest,
Mm.
and so it took me a long time to reach that point. But I got more and more engaged over time. But I have to tell you, and this is true, I've found of young people too, and that is most mothers, working mothers, carry a lot of guilt. There's conflict no matter what and even today I can feel it. It's, um I've always been saddled with that. It's rather, at this point, I may feel like, if like when I was making my movie, I went to Minnesota for a couple of weeks. I went for like 3 weeks, but I came home for like a period in between because I felt my husband was home and I wasn't there. It's like he's not a child, but I guess I've grown up in a culture, or at a time where I felt like for me to just go off and do my own thing for long periods of time, it's something I'm not comfortable with. So I am not the feminist in the way that the young people are today, where they feel much freer. to do things and to not feel like, to kind of express themselves. But I always try to do it within the confine of my family and what feels comfortable to me. And I've been through so much conflict over the years, particularly in theater, where I would be where I was have a show that would be out of town, and I'd be out of town for a couple of weeks with the show or whatever, and it was just, I mean, when I got away, it was nice, and I always liked it, but I felt so much guilt at times.
Yeah.
I feel like I'm kind of undoing all the thoughts of me as a feminist, but
No,
I made a deliberate choice, not
Mhm.
unless I'm really, really, really involved in something personally. It's something I've written or something I'm really involved with. I made a choice not to do it anymore because I just couldn't live with myself that way. I was too uncomfortable.
Yeah, that's
And
actually what I was going even on the next question and everything, because I know a lot of times people are trying to figure out how to do that work-life balance, particularly those of us that are in the creative space. So it looks to me that if I'm hearing you correctly, that one of the things you had to do was try to prioritize and also try to make sure that things that you wanted to get time, whether that was time with your husband or time with your kids, that it got equal time in addition to some of the other things that are going on as well, because I know that that is a constant theme that we hear oftentimes here on the network, is people trying to struggle and figure out how to do that work-life balance.
it's always a juggling act, and you're just, shifting your priorities as you do it, and it's always a juggling act. I've been in rehearsals for a show, for example, that I may have written the book of, and I'm very invested in it. And the rehearsal process, I always used to say, if I go to the bathroom, they're going to change the story. I mean, I used to worry about not being in the room, but I mean, in a couple of those times where I would have one of my kids who would be in some kind of an emotional crisis, and I was gone. Believe me, even if I stayed there all the time, I wasn't there. I mentally wasn't there. I just couldn't be there sometimes. My family has to be the top priority. If there's something I need to be there for, I'm going to be there.
No, that makes a lot of sense. Family is definitely a primary responsibility and definitely the thing that
Yeah, my
should be
kids are
as a
it's my greatest. I mean, listen, I have a large family, and I try to have, I mean, with all the grandkids, I mean, my grandchildren, my oldest grandchild I have to think about it, but he's 33.
Okay.
And my youngest is 5.
Oh, wow.
So over there've been a period of years where, you want you to be close to your grandchildren. You got to make time. I've not been a babysitter type grandmother, but I've always been involved with them in different ways.
No, that makes a lot of
And
sense. I don't think that my mom is a babysitter kind of grandmother either. I don't ever remember her doing that, but she definitely has been engaged with them, just like my dad has been engaged with them. In fact, they both come regularly to their soccer matches and their football matches and some of their
yeah,
other sporting activities that they are part of. As we're winding down and everything, I was just wondering, because the other thing that we talk about on this show quite a bit is this notion of the imposter syndrome. So you've done all these amazing things, and I was wondering, are there ever any times that you are questioning yourself? Because I know that sometimes that inner critic can be our worst enemy. I know that there have been jobs that I have not gone for, including at that cultural center that I'll be going to later on today and everything, because I was having too much of that battle within myself where I am talking myself out of doing stuff. And then if you add the outer critics, meaning family and friends, that can
absolutely,
add to it as well. So I just wondering, how have you dealt with that
all the
inner
time,
critic?
all the time. I totally identify with that. Do I call myself a writer? I have a book that's a hybrid publisher. And the writers struggle with that all the time. Am I a writer if I'm published, or if I'm a writer because I write? When I got into theater, kind of, I hadn't paid my dues. I hadn't been to school for it. It was all learning on the job and feeling like an imposter. When I became a divorce mediator, it was a brand new field. Oh my God, my first case I had, there was a guy who was the husband of a couple, and he kept asking me, "What are your credentials? What's your experience?" This was my first case. Oh my God, that was quite a challenge. So yes, I've faced it. I face it all the time. And I envy people who really believe in themselves and trust themselves. It's in fact, it's funny. A friend of mine I was going to have a book event with a friend of mine who's a journalist. She was going to be interviewing me, and she said, "I'll only interview you if you don't put yourself down." And I said, "Well, I can't promise."
Yeah, that's a fair assessment, but you've not put yourself down. You've actually done a good job of talking about a number of the things that people are concerned about and all along those lines. One of the things that I get everybody to do on this show, and I definitely want you to do it as we end and everything, because I thoroughly enjoyed this conversation, by the
Thank
way.
you.
And I hope that we'll come back on some other shows as well. But I've learned a lot about the different things, both around your book and the theater world, and a number of other things that I don't always know enough about. But I'm going to give you the full screen and all along those lines. But if you can tell folks, one of the things I get everybody to do is to share their message of hope and positivity within the world. Because one of the things that I believe is that we sometimes don't get enough of those kind of messages. So I love giving my guests the opportunity to spread a positive message to the world and all in that kind of way. So if there's a message of hope and positivity that you would like to share, I would definitely give you the time to do that now. And if you also want to tell folks how you can be reached and how people can support you in the different things that you are doing, I'll give you the time to do that as well. And I'm actually going to throw on a sweater and some other stuff so I can get prepared to get on out of here after we're done and everything. But I am still listening and will still pop on after you share those thoughts and everything.
Well, I'll start with the easier question, which is how to reach. Oh, did you go away?
I'm still here. I would just actually. Yeah.
Oh, all right. Well, I have a website called Jennifer, Jennifer, or you have it written, Manachurian.net. There's no space in between it. And that tells about, and there's a contact thing on there too. And actually, and I have a Gmail address, jennifermanachurian@gmail.com. But so that's the easy question, a message of hope. Well, I am basically, I am an optimistic person. I always think that I don't think negatively in terms of, there's so much to be enjoyed in the world. The message of hope, gosh, you really threw me with that, because I don't want to, I feel like I sometimes talk about the negativity and all the violence and everything in the world. And to me, what gives me hope is kind of first of all, is young people, and the fact that, they are much more open and receptive and to the world and all the changes in the world. For the most part, at least that's how I experience them, and the freshness of it. Kind of, they don't see color, they don't see race, they don't see, we all start out in a way that type of innocence is something that you hope that we'll all learn to kind of own all our lives.
Right.
But it's also I wake up in the morning, and even at night, I love my bedroom. I knit really weird things. I have a whole, I also knit bears that I give to children. I've given away, I don't know, a couple of hundred bears, I think. Even some of them I've sent to Europe. And I have these things that I've made in my room, and I have paintings that my father has done, some stuff my kids have done, things that my parents did. And I wake up in the morning, and even at night, I look around my room, and I have my cats are there too. And I just find pleasure in it. I feel like finding the hope for me is not the big dreams. Oh gosh, next year I'm going to go to Europe and blah, blah, blah. It's like finding joy in just the littlest, simplest things.
Yeah.
That's to me the hope, just being able to just sit back and kind of smell the roses and just enjoy the little things. Like you bake a cake and it comes out well.
Yeah, I agree. The little things are very important, and all along those lines, as we get ready to head out the door, I'm going to ask you a slightly silly question as the absolute last question and everything. But you mentioned the cat. I know the cat made a cameo appearance and all along those lines earlier and everything. So if
I don't
the
see where she
cat
went.
was able to have its moment in the sun, and if the cat was to give a description or to say what they thought of Miss Jennifer, what would the cat's answer be in the interview? So if you had to go into the
Oh,
mind of your cat, what do you think the cat would be thinking about this whole
oh,
interview process and you in general as a writer
oh.
and a creative?
Well, I don't know all of that, but I know they think I'm pretty perfect, right? Perfect. They cats. I mean, my cats are my shadows.
Mhm.
My dogs. I have 2 cats and 2 dogs. You know, I have a little thing that says, "Dear God, let me be as good a person as my dog thinks I am."
Mhm.
Oh, and in fact, I just got an amazing little thing, and I'm gonna misquote it all wrong, but it was about self care and to treat yourself the way you treat your dog. You know, would you like a treat? Would you like something nice? Good boy, good boy. My animals don't judge me, and that's nice. It's refreshing, right? Not to be judged.
Yeah, that's very refreshing. And yeah, most of the time animals are very unconditional. They just want their kind of attention. I do think that sometimes cats are, I love cats. I've had cats in the past and I've had dogs in the past. I've probably had more cats than dogs and everything. But cats are definitely fiercely independent. They like to have their,
They are,
yeah, they
but
like to have their time when they like to give you your time when they want you to have your time, whereas a dog will come to you at just about any time and everything. But cats are
absolutely.
definitely fiercely independent, so they will decide when they want you to rub them, not necessarily when you want to rub them and everything. Or as I have joked with a friend of mine, because she used to have one of those pointers and everything. And cats are also, I know we say dogs are extremely smart, but I also think cats are extremely smart because I have seen that the cats will play that game even as kittens for the first couple of minutes and everything, and then they realize what's going on, and then they're like, "I'm not playing that game anymore. I'm tired of that game, so I'm not doing that one."
We had a pointer, a German short-haired pointer you're talking about.
No, the point is that cat. This is like the cat.
Yeah, it's a little, yeah. Well, actually, it still works pretty well for me. The little
Okay.
red dot,
Yeah, the little red dot.
it works. It works just fine.
So the
But
cats
so
will still
I
chase it
don't
and
have
will.
it. I thought I have a big jar with treats in it, and I shake it, and that'll get them.
That'll definitely get them and everything. Well, Miss Jennifer, this has been a fun and enjoyable
Thank you, Mark.
conversation. I hope
It's a
that you will
pleasure.
come back in the near future and everything. And I'm glad that your publishers reached out. I reached out to them and then they reached back
Thank
out to
you.
me and everything. But I've thoroughly enjoyed our conversation. I hope that you'll come back on another show as well. We're actually at the top of the hour, so I'm going to end it and everything. But it's
Right.
been a
Well,
two-hour
when my
conversation.
movie comes out, I'd be happy to come on. Boundary Waters.
I look forward to it. I look forward to hearing more when the movie comes out. And what's the title of the movie again?
Boundary Waters.
Okay, look forward to hearing about Boundary Waters. And also, if you want to give a shout out to the book, because I do know the book title people may be interested in as well. So if
I'm
you want to
looking
give
to
a
see if
shout
I
out
have.
to the book so that people can go get a copy of that book as well.
I don't even have a copy near me, but it's called Alphabetti. Wait a minute. I have a little on my phone. That's what it
Yes,
looks like.
yes, I see that. Alphabetti.
And so far on Amazon, I have like 4.6 rating. A lot of review, very good review. Some of the reviews are really really nice. It's nice. It's scary as hell, but not. Excuse me. I think you probably don't like that language, but it's really scary putting yourself out into the world.
No, it definitely is scary, and I don't mind that kind of language. It's just part of our natural life and all along those lines. But I have thoroughly, like I said, enjoyed the conversation, and I will
Thank you,
definitely reach
Mark.
out to you
Thank you
when
so
the movie
much.
comes out. So I look
Thank you
forward
for
to it, and
having me on.
no problem. I
You're a
thoroughly
lovely
enjoyed it.
man. Thank
Yeah.
you.
Thank
All right.
you.
Bye now.
Bye.